Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdhury, Climate Action Pathways, episode 34. Today, we are very pleased to have newly appointed Special Climate Change Envoy of Timor Leste, Adao, Soares, Barbosa, who has been a lead negotiator for least developed countries on loss and damage for many years. And also we have other very distinguished panelists. So we are going to have this conversation on what happened to the just finished physical ministerial meeting ahead of COP26 in London just a couple of days back, and also head of delegation meetings for a number of issues. So, and also we had this G20 meeting. So what was the outcome? We would like to reflect on so that we can stress on to keep alive 1.5 degree Paris Agreement goals and also 1.5 degree global goal, net zero, and how best it can be expedited by steep cut within 2030, and also provision of climate finance, ramp up of climate finance, $100 billion plus per annum mobilization of resources for climate finance, and also long-term predictable new additional over and above ODA support for climate adaptation, climate mitigation, technology transfer and capacity building, and now loss and damage. So without much ado, I would now like to ask Adao to kick off the conversation. Especially, he will touch upon what importance the developing countries, especially the most vulnerable countries like least developed countries, small island developing states, and also African countries and Latin American countries are facing in terms of loss and damage. And as he has been arguing for quite some time that loss and damage has come to stay, and we have to address it, we have to support it, we have to minimize it, we have to say reduce the risk. Adao, you take.
Thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you very much, Quamrul, and good evening once again from Timor Leste. And first of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Quamrul for introducing me with regard to my nomination as special climate change and ambassador for climate change for Timor Leste. This was just new position for Timor Leste, and the swearing in ceremony was done on 13th July, last 3 weeks ago. So I am now becoming ready to support loss and damage negotiation process at both technical and also political level. So I also would like to thank you for inviting me to say some insight on loss and damage for this evening event. in terms of loss and damage faced by developing countries, I think we have been fighting this loss and damage for quite long way, and we established loss and damage international mechanism. We call it Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage at COP19 in Warsaw, and we established executive committee for Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage at the same time and same decision. One of the critical functions from this EXCOM, from the WIM was action and support for addressing loss and damage. And we actually, as one of our position, we actually would like to get a full operationalization of this international mechanism for loss and damage. But up to date, I think it's very hard for us to get financial support for the full operationalization of the functions of the WIM itself. So we are still fighting for getting support for this fully in terms of financial support, technological support, and also capacity building support. There are three functions actually of the WIM itself. First one is just to enhance understanding on approach to risk assessment issues, and second one is the coordination issues, and the third one is action and support. So at EXCOM level, we have already done some work for first function and also second function. But in fact, at the last COP in Madrid, we had a decision, COP's MA decision on how to address issue of action and support issue. So the decision I was asking the EXCOM to establish an expert group for action and support. So in fact, the EXCOM has already established action and support expert group, and this will be at least finalized and take decision at its next EXCOM meeting. So I think it will be in October or September somehow. So by having that sort of expert group for action and support, we are hoping that some of Madrid decisions with regard to linking the work of EXCOM with financial operating entities, that's DCF, and also DCF board, to take decision on how to get financial support from the DCF for loss and damage, even open some sort of window for loss and damage under this Green Climate Fund issues. It was also part of Madrid decision. So one of the critical issues for Madrid decision was also the establishment of Santiago network for loss and damage. The objective of this Santiago network was to catalyze, technical support approach to, address loss and damage, but by having or providing technical support for not only regional level, but even at national and also local level loss and damage issues, including but not limited to enabling parties to at least get technical support for easily accessing to financial issues or resources from outside. So parties are still negotiating with these issues. So last week in Glasgow, there was a ministerial meeting to discuss about these issues. But before that, the co-presidencies have already come up with some discussion papers twice, first iteration and also second iteration. So the second iteration paper was discussed at ministerial level last week in Glasgow. So as one of our positions as developing countries, especially LDC has a position to have a party-driven process for operationalization of this Santiago network. But some developed country parties, they are opposing this party-drivenness in terms of having parties' views to get, COP and CMA decisions.
Okay.
In fact,
Yeah. Adao,
party-drivenness.
Adao, thank you for. I think we will come back to you again. For the time being, I would like to ask others also, so that this conversation is a very interactive one. So you will get 2 more chances. So don't worry. Okay.
Oh, okay, okay.
Adao, yeah. Okay. Then I would like to.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Same, Adao. Anna, Anna Schulz, what is your take, especially how you look at the issues, grants issues cropping up or approached by different countries, different parties, different groups from outside negotiation? What is your take, Anna?
Thanks, Quamrul. Yeah, the ministerial was, I think, a really important opportunity. It was the first, of course, opportunity for negotiators and ministers at the political level to meet in person. But I also think that it does demonstrate the challenges that COP is going to face in terms of logistics related to COVID. Certainly not all of the parties were able to attend in person. And I do think that highlights some of the concerns that a lot of people have about whether or not all parties and civil society are going to be able to actually make it to Glasgow. So I do think that the COP26 presidency needs to think very carefully about how they're going to manage those types of logistical challenges in advance of COP. But I also think that the ministerial provided a really excellent sort of political space in which to advance understanding. And I do think that coming out of the ministerial, certainly I was more positive coming out of the ministerial than I was out of the subsidiary body meetings. And so, because it did feel like they were starting to unlock some of the really critical issues. I do think that there are some significant challenges still running into COP26. One is developed countries really have to be able to demonstrate that they have met the $100 billion target or have a plan to remedy that very, very quickly, because the data is indicating nearly 2 years behind schedule on that. So I think that that's really critical to building trust of developing countries. I also think that the IPCC report, which is coming out on Monday, is going to indicate an urgent need to rapidly scale up, submit significantly more ambitious nationally determined contributions. And may also indicate that net zero targets need to be strengthened, and possibly even sort of reconsider some of the language around net zero targets. I think as Adao mentioned, loss and damage is critically important. And we're not going to be able to leave Glasgow and call it a success without significant progress to operationalize the new Santiago network, and also just really start the discussions around tangible finance to address loss and damage.
Okay.
So that's a really brief rundown of some of the key issues that I see.
Okay, I'll come back to you again. Mattias, after holidays, what is your take, especially reflection? How you see?
Thank you, and thanks a lot for inviting me. As you know, I'm representing ACT Alliance, and meaning churches and church-based development NGOs around the world working on the ground. And I must say that I'm very, very concerned. The past months have shown that people are really, really suffering, and millions of people have been affected by flooding and heat waves and typhoons and many other climate-related disasters. And it's really, really urgent. And I'm also, like Anna, fearing the IPCC report on Monday. This will really, really show also from the science side that there's need for action. And looking at the current situation where we had a G20 and we had the ministerial in London, I appreciate that there were some progress, but I'm also concerned that the existing NDCs which have been submitted are not ambitious enough, and that we're still waiting for NDCs from some really important emitters. And if we're going to really achieve the 1.5 target, everyone needs to step up. And we can't just be locked in with the existing plans. And then just a final word, I think the disasters we've seen around the world, as Adao and Anna also spelled out, we all need to address it. It's not just a concern for the least developed countries, it's a concern for everyone. And of course, we need funds to address loss and damage. That should be evident for everyone. And I really hope that all parties are revising their existing positions, because it's I've been following these talks for many years, and can't continue in the same way. Thanks.
Okay, Mattias. As always, you have been very precise and concise. Rishi, from your perspective, from Tufts perspective or Fletcher School of Diplomacy's perspective, how you look through the road to Glasgow? Is it kinky one? Is it straight one? Is it linear one? Is it straight one? What is your take?
Great. Thank you, Quamrul Chowdhury, for having me on. Let me just clarify that I'm speaking personally, not organizationally. I'm not speaking on behalf of Fletcher. But I just wanted to echo Anna's concerns about participation. I think that's something to be, keeping an eye on, because logistics will, at the end, shape a lot of how these talks actually progress on the ground. So that's the first thing. The second is that I worry that this focus on net zero strategies perhaps is clouding or, taking away the space that we really need to be having for immediate, urgent action. And I think it's important to keep short-term actions in mind. Of course, aligning all of these NDCs with net zero pathways would be absolutely essential, but a focus on immediate and urgent action is also extremely important. And the last thing I'll say is that, of course, this high-level political discussion on the $100 billion goal is extremely important. And what I wanted to flag within that is the importance of finance for adaptation, because we've known throughout this decade, adaptation finance has been a minuscule, a proportion of overall climate finance. And what we're seeing is how the lack of adaptation finance is really causing a tremendous amount of stress on the system. And here I would like to flag the negotiations on what's called Article 6, more or less carbon markets, where there are major demands, very legitimate demands by developing countries for there to be more sources of adaptation finance. And so we're seeing how the lack of mobilization of adaptation finance is trickling in and causing stress in various parts of the system. So if we want Article 6 to be fully resolved, we're going to have to really sort out some of these longstanding issues where we have not been able to live up to commitments.
Yeah. Yes, sure. Article 6, especially Paris Rulebook, is quite essential, and Article 6.2, Article 6.4, Article 6.8, and other parts of Article 6 is of paramount importance, because the integrity of the whole system, market mechanism, non-market mechanism, depends on the framing of Article 6, how we resolve that. Transparency mechanism, and also the rule for say cooperative measures, cooperative actions, and also like CDM regime, new regime we have to establish, and those rules should be framed under Article 6. So these negotiations are quite overdue, but in Madrid we failed to do that. So this time in Glasgow we have to finish this unfinished part of Madrid. Now I would like to ask Ella. You are also following Glasgow COP26, and Chatham House is one of the key institutes where we have seen in the past also some discourse, especially some parleys, some intellectual exercises, debates you are organizing. So how best those are in the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow? Ella, what is your reflection, thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I think looking at the kind of recent ministerial notes, I think there needs to be more attention paid perhaps to kind of the balance between mitigation, resilience, and adaptation, because I think the dominant focus when I look at these kind of notes is on adaptation, resilience. And I think there's a danger there that when you kind of lose focus on mitigation as well, there's a kind of like idea that these impacts are almost inevitable and that we can't do anything to stop them. We just have to deal with the impacts as they happen. And I think, that balance needs to be paid attention to perhaps more so, and kind of a greater focus on mitigation could be really important. And then I think another note to think about in terms of COP and the outcomes of COP is that the COP leadership team still is not 50-50 gender balanced. And, it's widely accepted now that climate change does have gendered impacts. And that's kind of particularly so in least developed countries where women are very resource dependent and kind of highly involved in agriculture as well. So I think that's something that really needs to be pushed, and something that everyone should kind of be pushing for as well. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Ella. You can see here we have a quite gender balance. But in negotiation, in COPs, we seldom see that. In very many countries, we have seen that even not a single, say, women is there. So there is not that balance. Even in UNFCCC Secretariat, there is no gender balance. So we have to fix those. Maybe in the days ahead, that will be. Now, Sarah Millar, you have been also in the holidays. After holidays, what is your reflection on the just finished ministerial physical in London and also G20 meetings? Are you happy? Are you dissatisfied? Do you think trans issues have been sorted out in these parliaments, or we need to go many more miles on our road to Glasgow? Sarah.
Thank you, Quamrul, and thank you for inviting me on again. Am I satisfied? No, I'm not. Could it have been worse? Yes, it could. I think the G20, I think the expectation was it was going to be rather disappointing, and perhaps it was only somewhat disappointing. My hopeful takeaway is that there were at least some hooks from the G20 that we know that we can build on, and we know that there'll be opportunities in September at UNGA, and there are lots of rumours about what might happen there and US-led leaders meetings and that kind of thing that might give us those extra opportunities to have physical parleys where we can look each other in the eye and at least make some progress ahead of the Leaders Summit at the G20. Hearing conversations from colleagues who took part in the July ministerial in London, I think everybody was so happy to be back in a room together, and reflecting on what Anna said about inclusivity, and it wasn't possible for everybody to be there, but those who were together in the room, I think there was a sense of relief that it was possible to be back together again. And I don't think we can underestimate the importance of those physical meetings. I also get the impression slightly that people are still a little bit unused to being back together again. So it's a little bit clunky and it's a little bit awkward, and sort of people have forgotten how to dance together a little bit. And I certainly felt that at the G7 in Cornwall in June. And, you know, lots of people sort of described it as the band has got back together, but they're not yet playing music together. And so it's a sort of how quickly can we get everybody back in the recording studio and playing harmoniously again. Reflecting on what Mattias was saying about, you know, extreme weather events, I think it's certainly focusing people's minds. I think Monday in the IPCC will focus minds further. I think the worry is it will lead people into sort of the climate despair narrative as opposed to the urgency narrative. And I think all of us on this programme would appreciate that, you know, we have to maintain momentum, and we have to, you know, not be overly positive when things aren't positive, but we have to have that sense of hope, because if we don't, we can very quickly get into, you know, lots of difficulties. We will all feel that things aren't possible, and I think we all need to press really, really hard on it is still possible, the window is still open, and we have to act with that sense of urgency. I think one of the British newspapers did a very strong piece this week, Henry Mance, and he talked about, you know, leaders are behaving as if, you know, they've had a headache rather than a heart attack. And I think, you know, we need to treat the climate emergency as if we're in the throes of a heart attack, not just a minor headache that we can fix with paracetamol. It's really great that, you know, people like Adao are being appointed. You know, loss and damage, we're all experiencing it. I think it's so fascinating that, you know, colleagues from Bangladesh were offering technical assistance and advice for folks in Germany who were suffering. And as on the call have said, you know, it's not a one-way street anymore. We're going to see that sort of technical exchange and capacity building happening, you know, from global south to global north and vice versa. And I wonder, and I'd be fascinated to hear other people's thoughts on the programme. This proposition about having a special envoy for loss and damage, to me that feels like a really obvious political win, by elevating loss and damage in the same way that we've appointed special envoys for mitigation or for cities or for urban areas. So I hope that gets traction, and I think, you know, that would really, really help put the spotlight on and give that political elevation to loss and damage, which is so badly needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think Adao is not only loss and damage envoy, but also he is special presidential climate envoy. Means whole gamut of climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, climate change technology transfer, capacity building, loss and damage, and also climate finance. So for all those issues, grants issues, he is presidential special climate envoy. Adao, are you here? Yes. Now
Yes,
your second turn. Yeah, now your second turn, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Adao. Yeah.
Yes. So
you see, they have been praising you. They have been recognizing you, greeting you.
Thank you.
With that,
thank you very much.
I am asking you again to share your reflections.
Yes, let me continue my previous discussion ahead. So by Glasgow, we as parties, we need to come up with some sort of finalization of how to operationalize Santiago network to support technical, especially how to enable them to access to financial resources and all technology and also capacity building issues. It's not only to others to minimize and avert, but it will be also useful to address both extreme events and also slow onset events. So in terms of financial issues, I think like my colleagues say that we look forward to get full operationalization of 100 billion per year. So it was for 2020, but now we are in 2021. So we really need to have that sort of financial figure for supporting adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, as well as how to address issues of capacity building that some of my colleagues have already said before me. So by Glasgow, we also need to have like Article 6. I think one of our colleagues just mentioned about this. So how to finalize, Paris rule book, like you also mentioned about this. So in terms of having this article, it will be also some sort of benefit for adaptation fund under the Paris Agreement issues. That will be also useful to get CDM like mechanism in place for having adaptation co-benefit for this. And it will be also enabling developing countries to address issue of environmental integrity by having some CDM like projects to at least to conserve the forest, and also renewable energy issue will be also critically important to be part of CDM like mechanism. And apart from that, I think in terms of mitigation for developing countries, especially the LDCs and small island states, there will be also useful to operationalize, or at least to take some decisions in place for having mitigation measures by providing technology support in terms of promoting of technology in the area of renewable energy. So that will be useful for developing countries to address issues of a low carbon development path. I think this will be also part of decisions that we need to take by Glasgow. In terms of NDCs, I think that's also very critical issues to address all of the critical issues, building blocks in terms of action and support, in terms of mitigation measures under the NDCs, but we need to have a more ambitious mitigation issues from parties. I think by having that sort of mitigation commitments, loss and damage will be reduced by the time. I think that will be a way forward to increase, resilience, to build resilience. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I will come back to you again. Adao. Say, Anna Schulz.
Thanks, Quamrul. Yeah, I guess just reflecting on some of what's been said thus far, I couldn't agree more with Rishi on the need to address the issue of adaptation finance as a part of addressing the $100 billion goal. We all know that adaptation finance is simply not being delivered. There was an agreement that adaptation finance would be 50-50 with finance for mitigation. And we know that that's falling critically short and is significantly impacting the capacity of developing countries to undertake adaptation actions. We also know that that funding is primarily being received in loans for activities that are typically non-economic generating in nature. And so adaptation finance should really be in the form of grants rather than loans. And so there's a significant need to restructure the way adaptation finance is being considered. Obviously, the Article 6 negotiations, the share of proceeds under 6.4 is going to provide an absolutely critical
6.2.
This is what my point was, is that it also has to be under 6.2 in order to provide the scale of predictable finance that's necessary for adaptation. And the only way to accomplish that is for all elements under Article 6 to be subject to share proceeds. And so, yeah, really just to echo that point on the issue of adaptation and the balance between adaptation and mitigation in the negotiations, I do think that it's critically important at the political level to have really strong engagement on adaptation issues, in particular because if you look at the sum total of sort of discussions within the COP and the CMA, there's not a really strong anchor point for adaptation in those negotiations. Adaptation discussions are spread across a number of agenda items. And I think that is really concerning to a lot of developing countries because adaptation is really critical element for them, as of course is loss and damage. So yeah, really think that it's critically important to advance understanding on adaptation at the political level as well.
In negotiation, what I have been arguing for many years, that adaptation is a function of mitigation. If we do more mitigation, then we do need less adaptation, but we are not faring at mitigating. We are not at all mitigating for decades. So we now need to do more adaptation, more resilience building. But adaptation has also limit. Cost of adaptation has also gone up because of less mitigation. So we do need a lot of NDCs and robust NDCs, ambitious NDCs, raising the ambition level. And also that, as Rishi pointed out, that it should be steep one, and it should be looked at the short term one, especially before 2030, how best we can cut back our emissions. If we don't cut back our emissions before 2030, then say we do require lot more adaptations, but adaptation finance is nowhere near the needs. Every year we do require more than $1 trillion for adaptation, but we are not even spending $100 billion worldwide for adaptation. So we need to at least mobilize $1 trillion before 2025 and $2 trillion for 2030. That way we should move if we want to do really mean business and do really mean to adapt and resilience building. Otherwise, we can't do that. And also, we have to raise our ambitions, especially in terms of mitigation. Our ambitious NDC submission should be encouraged before Glasgow. Rishi, you take.
Sure, thank you. Something I would like to emphasize here is the importance of countries having fiscal space. I know climate change negotiators often don't touch on fiscal issues, but the importance of debt relief, particularly when it comes to actually dealing with the aftermath or the ongoing effects of the global pandemic, actually, I think we really need to keep in mind not just the $100 billion goal, but also significantly addressing the massive debt burden that many countries, including small island states, are currently facing, and that without relieving the fiscal strain on many of these economies, domestic action is going to be very slow. And so if we want very ambitious domestic action on these issues, developing countries are going to have to see a lot of fiscal space opening up. And in that regard, it's encouraging that the World Bank and IMF are thinking about putting forward concrete options in regards to debt to climate swaps. And so that's something I think that we, need to be actively not just thinking about, but also, putting forward concrete options in terms of what countries are, would actually be able to do. And so I think we need to keep this $100 billion goal discussion in mind in terms of what the actual public finance situation, really is in countries and how we can increase the scope for actually tackling these issues very promptly.
Yeah, Rishi, you are absolutely right. We have to look beyond 100 billion per annum and also fiscal measures because in every country, even in my own country, Bangladesh, it is every budget, national budget in our fiscal region, but we need to more focus on it. We need to have our, financing climate change. Even in our banking, we need to integrate it. We need to also incorporate in our budget making and also accounting, public accounting, and also auditing, because after completion of some programs on climate change, that should be also subject to audit, and that auditing should be right honestly done. So we need a lot of work back home, but globally we need to look beyond $100 billion per annum. We have to look at go for trillions of dollars investment and also phasing out fossil fuels, fossil fuel subsidies. We have to phase that out because every year $5 trillion we are spending for fossil fuel subsidies. So we have to come out of that fiscal regimes globally, financial regimes, investment regime globally, banking system. We have to mobilize that. Ella, what is your take?
So I think, in response to what Sarah mentioned, Envoy for loss and damage, I really agree. I think that would move. I think comparatively, there is not really a huge amount of political cover on loss and damage. And I think that should be changed and raised awareness of. And I think that a special envoy on that would be way to that move, because I think especially in kind of civil society circles, I don't think there's nearly enough awareness of the importance of that, and obviously loss and damage requires. So kind of putting that political pressure on that could be an important part of progress.
Okay, Ella, I think your network is very low. Okay. Mattias.
Thank you. And there's been said so many good things, and I just want to elaborate a little bit on the links between the political process on UN level to the national level, because I agree fully with the need for scaled up ambition, especially on loss and damage and on finance and adaptation. But this depends also on processes on national level. And I know many developed countries, they are currently looking into their budgets for next year. And this is the time they should really look deep into their pockets and see where they can find more money. Because the existing amounts, just continuing with this existing budgets is not good enough. We need more grants, as mentioned also. Yeah. We can't just provide loans. So I would really call on governments to ensure that they do their homework before the COP, because if they have no mandate coming to the COP will fail. So the work is now on national level.
Yeah, not only that, Mattias, they have to have provision in their budgets, in their say parliaments, in their say Senate, in their Congress, in their parliaments. They have to have legislation. They have to pass that that this quantum of resources they are spending as grants, public grants, public money as grants for the developing countries, for the most vulnerable countries, as climate finance. They have to earmark that in their not only budget, but also in their legislation. They have to enact that, like US Congress, Senate, say House of Commons, House of Representatives. So on their EU Parliament, they have to enact that, say, budgetary provisions, fiscal provisions, and also overseas grants. So that sanction, they have to have that. And right now, you are right, Mattias. And Sarah.
Thank you. I wanted to...
And UK has reduced the say ODA, cut slashed ODA budget. So do you think it is dampening effect in the say momentum geared up ahead of Glasgow COP26?
So the UK ODA decision is obviously extremely disappointing, and it massively undermines the leadership that the host of the COP can bring. My understanding is that the COP president designate went into number 10 very hard to explain what the consequences would be. I think what's even more damaging is what was going to be a temporary reduction. The vote has now made that a much more permanent reduction, and the criteria make it incredibly difficult for that to be reversed. I think there are those in the UK who would argue, you know, that the UK was one of the few that was meeting the 0.7 in the first place. I don't think that matters, because the signal that it sends is just so damaging in the year of hosting the COP in Glasgow. So it does make it more difficult. I think what's even more, you know, complicated is that as UK ministers are going around and having the bilaterals and doing the climate diplomacy, they haven't really heard that strong pushback on how damaging the ODA decision has been. Now, I guess that's because everybody's far too polite to mention it. But what it does mean is that, you know, the COP president designate that can't then go back and say, all these countries are telling me how damaging it is, because they haven't actually said that to him directly. It may be what everybody's feeling, it may be what everybody would wish they could say, but unless it's said, he can't then take the anecdote back, and that's incredibly challenging. What I did want to build upon was what Mattias was saying about that political level that needs to go on between, you know, these last few weeks before Glasgow. And certainly what I'm seeing in my work is, you know, it's a no after you. So we have folks who are being quite reticent on coming forward with more climate finance. And in return, we have other folks who are being very reticent on coming forward with their NDCs. And we know that there are some really key NDCs that are missing. But because we're into this brinksman or brinkswomanship of no after you, we need to have a process to unblock that. And I think the July ministerial went a good way to doing that, certainly on climate finance and having this pair of countries, Canada and Germany. Slightly disappointing not to see a developing country perhaps in that pair, but I would hope that those two countries would obviously do the shuttle diplomacy to the developing countries to get their views on how that needs to look. However, you know, if we have a process that has a pathway to the 100 billion, which I think is what we're going to get, then hopefully that's going to remove some of the cover and some of the no after you business that we're into, and we get some of those NDCs from some of those big countries that, you know, that are big emitters, you know, and it doesn't matter if they're in the developed country list or the developing country list, they are noticeable by their absence, just as the climate finance from the developed countries is notable by its absence. And so we need to break these brinksman walls down at that political level, as Mattias was saying.
Thank you, Sarah. Adao, are you with us? Adao, your
Yes.
final message. Okay.
Yes, it's not much age, but my final point for the operationalization of Santiago network will be quite heavy negotiation at Glasgow, because there are some different views how to operationalize this Santiago network. As I can see, the current positions from different parties, some of them are quite close each other, but some of them it's still quite far. So what my hope will be narrow down the positions and come with some concrete actions, and we need to have a decision in place to operationalize this Santiago network. And it's not only to operationalize a technical issue, but it will be also supported by political issues. So the process needs to be speed up, and it needs to be facilitated by very high level people to lead parties to go with, you know, common ground, middle ground, ground point of view, so that it will be taking us to have a decision by Glasgow. In terms of that issues, we also need to get financial support for loss and damage, even for this operationalization, and also for other issues to address, avert, and also minimize loss and damage. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Congratulations again for your appointment. On behalf of everyone, on behalf of Climate Channel, we would like to greet you, and also as a climate negotiator, I feel very proud, because when you have joined the climate negotiation, I was over there. I saw you, how you relentlessly worked for the cause of least developed countries, for your own countries, because at that point of time in history, I was a lead negotiator of least developed countries, and you are supporting me quite enormously. So I still fondly remember those days. And I was lead negotiator for even loss and damage, and you took over me from me, and I saw how earnestly you worked for that, and you took the loss and damage issues to this level. So my admiration, my heartfelt supporting you, and also my colleagues who have been supporting you for many years. Thank you, Adao, and my best wishes for your success in the days ahead. Anna, what is your last message?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a very busy few months in the lead up to Glasgow. There's a need to keep sort of urgent pressure on sort of all of the different negotiating mandates that are going to be moving forward. And I do think that the Secretariat negotiators and the COP26 presidency have been doing a very good job of keeping up the pressure through the heads of delegation meetings, the technical negotiations. So they are actively looking for ways to unlock all of these different issues. It's also going to take a tremendous amount of high-level political leadership to unstick the issues that were identified by Sarah, as on down to you know, the technical negotiators that are hashing out the options for text that will be on the table in Glasgow. I do think it's still possible to have a strong outcome in Glasgow, but it's going to require a tremendous amount of work between now and then.
Yeah, only say 85 days, 86 days remaining. So every day you have to work. Yeah, and Secretariat people, they are working relentlessly. Presidency, incoming presidency, they have to work right honestly. So we have to work, and everybody has a role to play in the run-up, in the road to Glasgow. So Ella, what is your final word?
Yeah, just to build on what Anna's covered, I mean, I think keeping up that pressure is crucial. And I think not only just from high political levels, but also from civil society, you know, youth groups, they're going to play a huge role in kind of creating that public pressure on their governments to actually kind of hold them accountable to making kind of genuine outcomes to come of this. So I think, you know, just kind of keeping that momentum going throughout all circles, and keeping their kind of really eyes on these high political players to make sure that, you know, they know the world is watching and this is their time to make something of it.
Yeah, and also Ella, I think our research institutions, our academic institutions, our say intellectuals, our say professors, legendary professors, and also say international organizations, they should also keep the pressure. Universities, they should be vocal, especially in the run-up to say Glasgow. Say institutions like Chatham House, institutions like say IIED, ISD, say Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Tufts, Fletcher, all these institutions should LSE, these institutions have to play a role. Say Professor Nicholas Stern, or say economists like say Nobel laureates, they should come up. They should hammer on. Say Bob Watson, scientists like them, they should come up. They should hammer on. They should call upon the presidents, the prime ministers, so that there is a political pressure. There is a say pressure from the civil society, academic institutions, that will cut a lot of, say, waters. We can have a certain waters, but deep, but we have to, at the end of the day, we have to rescue many people, billions of people who are on the hook of adverse impacts of climate change across the world in the most vulnerable countries. So we have to take them off the hook. Rishi, your final word.
Thank you. I agree with most of what's been said earlier. I think it's important to recognize the vision that's been put forward by the COP26 presidency, but particularly when it comes to matters such as rapidly phasing out unabated coal, for example. But I think what we have seen thus far, whether it's by groups like the G7 or the G20, is that there still is a substantial political gap between the vision put on the table by the COP26 presidency with where the conversation is converging around. So there's a giant gap to fill between where the G20 landed versus where we really need to go in Glasgow to really make that vision a reality in Glasgow. And so I'll just end there. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Rishi, I would also ask you to organize a couple of events in the run-up to Glasgow. Even in Glasgow, you should have, say, on behalf of Fletcher, on behalf of Tufts, you should hammer on. Even we are volunteering to speak over there, because that way we should mount pressure, keep on, say, alive this discourse, keep on alive the 1.5 degree goal. Sarah.
Thank you, Quamrul. Excellent closing comments from everybody. So I'll just build a little bit on what's been said. I think we have to recognise that the COP is just one meeting and it doesn't solve everything.
Yeah.
But it does feel super high expectation this time for lots of different reasons. I won't go into any of them now. Too much detail to go into, but I think we have to recognise that there are lots of different elements happening around the COP. So there is a high-level political discourse, as Rishi's pointed out. There's quite a big gap on the 1.5 language coming from different countries. There is a bit of a coalescence around phasing out coal, but it's not super clear. And will we get that clarity by COP? We'll have to wait and see. I think there's then the technical negotiating deals that have to be done. And some of those are extremely important, and we've spoken about Article 6 at length on the programme today and the Paris rulebook. And then I think there are the deals that need to be made in the real economy, where the COP provides that milestone moment to make those announcements. So, whether it's on coal, whether it's on oil and gas, or methane, or forests, these are real things that demonstrate that the signal from the Paris Agreement is being transmitted and received, and the shifts are happening in the real economy. Because if we don't see that, then the Paris Agreement isn't working. It's incredibly important that we have the negotiations and we make these agreements, but if we don't see then the reaction coming from the real economy and the whole of society, then it's not operationalized. And I know Adao was talking about operationalizing the and the Santiago network, but all of it is just pieces of paper unless it's operationalized and things genuinely happen. So for me, it's those three things: it's the political level, it's the technical negotiations, and it's the real economy shifts. And we don't have a lot of time, but we know that this is a really high expectation COP, and there's a lot to do.
Yeah. And I think you have to also play a role in the run-up to Glasgow, because if you can organize at least some webinar now with some lead climate negotiators, with some ministers, and with some, say, UK ministers, involving UK ministers and couple of other developing country ministers, US envoys and others. That will be helpful. Even with some academicians, that will be quite helpful. And also say if Ella and his colleagues in Chatham House can also organize some events, especially on NDCs, on net zero, on say climate finance, so on say adaptation, on say adaptation and resilience building, on say loss and damage, on say Article 6. These will help craft the success in Glasgow in the run-up. If you can do that, that will be helpful. Say IIED can organize a couple of events with some intellectual, with some professors, with some say key negotiators, with some key ministers from all over the world. That will be helpful. That will help raise the not only understanding but also bridge the widening gap. That will be quite useful because you see, in the run-up to Paris or in the run-up to Copenhagen, we have seen a lot of those kind of physical events. But this time we can't organize physical events, but virtually at least we can do somewhat, and if possible some physical events. That will help boost the work. And also some articles, if you can write in some of the leading newspapers and also some of the leading television stations, if programs are aired, that will keep pressure on the political masters. That will help us a lot. Adao, are you here? Or you have?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so you can again say something to finish this, to close this conversation tonight.
Thank
Last
you.
word.
Yeah, thank you very much for all who contribute for speeding up the climate change negotiation process for Glasgow. But I hear that we are all hoping that Glasgow will succeed. I think this is all. And we hope that NGOs, academia, agencies, international and also national agencies will provide their support for pushing government delegates for that meeting, so they will at least come up with some sort of decisions for all issues, but more focusing on operationalization of Santiago network for loss and damage. So thank you very much once again for inviting me to share my thoughts around this issue for this event. Thank you very much and all the best. Stay safe.
So it was a great pleasure to have you all, Adao, Ella, Sarah, Rishi, Anna, and also Mattias, who left us just minutes back. So it was a great pleasure, and thank you very much on behalf of Climate Channel. Hope to see you in any of our future episodes. So with that, I would like to close this episode, this conversation for tonight. Thank you very much.
Civic Nation, yes is a word you hear a lot. And with the all